bearing up against all reverses, meeting each danger, overcoming each difficulty, and offering a firm front to every foe. It is unlikely that any complete history of these events will ever be written in a form and style which will interest a later generation. The complications of extraordinary names and the imperfection of the records might alone deter the chronicler. The universal squalor of the scenes and the ignorance of the actors add discouragements. Nor, upon the other hand, are there great incentives. The tale is one of war of the cruelest, bloodiest, and most confused type. One savage army slaughters another. One fierce general cuts his rival's throat. The same features are repeated with wearying monotony. When one battle is understood, all may be imagined. Above the tumult, the figure of the Khalifa rises stern and solitary, the only object which may attract the interest of a happier world. Yet even the Khalifa's methods were oppressively monotonous. For although the nature or courage of the revolts might differ with the occasion, the results were invariable, and the heads of all his chief enemies, of many of his generals, of most of his councillors, met in the capacious pit which yawned in Omdurman. During the 13 years of his reign, Abdullah tried nearly every device by which Oriental rulers have sought to fortify their perilous sovereignty. He shrank from nothing. Self-preservation was the guiding principle of his policy, his first object and his only excuse. Among many wicked and ingenious expedients, 3 main methods are remarkable. First, he removed or rendered innocuous all real or potential rivals. Secondly, he pursued what Sir Alfred Milner has called a well-considered policy of military concentration. Thirdly, he maintained among the desert and riverine people a balance of power on the side of his own tribe. All these 3 methods merit some attention or illustration. The general massacre of all possible claimants usually follows the accession of a usurper to an Oriental throne. The Khalifa was able to avoid this extreme measure. Nevertheless, he took precautions. Availing himself of the grief and terror that had followed Muhammad Ahmed's death, he had extorted the oath of allegiance from the 2 other Khalifas and from the Ashraf, or relations of the Prophet. The Mahdi had superseded the original Muhammad as the Prophet. His relations consequently became Ashraf. But these complacent men soon repented of their submission. Each Khalifa boasted his independence. Each marched attended by a numerous retinue. Each asserted his right to beat his own great copper drum. Both the unsuccessful Khalifas combined against Abdullah. But while they had been busy with the beating of war drums and the preparation of pageants, that sagacious ruler had secured the loyalty of the Baggara tribe, to a section of which he belonged, and of a considerable force of black riflemen. At length matters reached climax. Both parties prepared for war. Abdullah drew up his array without the city, and challenged his rivals to the utmost proof. The combined forces of the ousted Khalifas were the more numerous, but the fierce Baggara waved their swords, and the Sudanese riflemen were famous for their valour. For some hours a bloody struggle appeared imminent. Then the confederacy broke up. The Khalifa Ali Wad Helu, a prudent man, talked of compromise and amity. The Caliph Sherif, thus seriously weakened, hastened to make peace while time remained. Eventually both bowed to the superior force of the ruler and the superior courage of his followers. Once they had submitted, their power was gone. Abdullah reduced their forces to a personal escort of 50 men each, deprived them of their flags and their war drums, the emblems of royalty, and they became for the future the useful supporters of a government they were unable to subvert. To other less powerful and more stubborn enemies he showed a greater severity. The Mahdi's 2 uncles, named respectively Abdel Karim and Abdel Kadar, were thrown chained into prison, their houses were destroyed, and their wives and other property confiscated. The numerous persons who claimed to be of the Ashraf found the saintly honour a burden upon earth, for, in order to keep them out of mischief, the Khalifa enjoined them to attend 5 times every day at the prayers in the mosque. 18 months of these devotions, declares the Christian chronicler, were considered the highest punishment. From Ohrwalder, 10 years' captivity. Still more barbarous was the treatment meted out to the unfortunate emir who had charge of the treasury. Ahmed Wad Suleiman had been accustomed under the Mahdi's mild rule to keep no public accounts, and consequently he had amassed a large fortune. He was actively hostile to Abdullah, and proclaimed his sympathy with the Ashraf, whereupon the Khalifa invited him to give an account of his stewardship. This he was of course unable to do. He was then dismissed from his appointment. His private property was taken to fill the deficiencies of the state, and the brutal population of Omdurman applauded his punishment as an act of justice. From Slatin, Fire and Sword. Although the Khalifa might establish his authority by such atrocities, its maintenance depended on the military policy which he consistently pursued. The terrible power of a standing army may usually be exerted by whoever can control its leaders, as a mighty engine is set in motion by the turning of a handle. Yet to turn the handle some muscular force is necessary. Abdullah knew that to rule the Sudan he must have a great army. To make the great army obedient he must have another separate force, for the influences which keep European armies in subjection were not present among the Dervishes. For some years, indeed, he was compelled to leave much to chance or the loyalty of his officers. But latterly, when he had perfected his organization, he became quite independent and had no need to trust anyone. By degrees and with astonishing ability, he carried out his schemes. He invited his own tribe, the Taisha section of the Baggara Arabs, to come and live in Omdurman. "Come," he wrote in numerous letters to them, "and take possession of the lands which the Lord your God has given you." Allured by the hopes of wealth and wives and the promise of power, the savage herdsmen came to the number of 7,000 warriors. Their path was made smooth and easy. Granaries were erected along the route. Steamers and sailing vessels awaited on the Nile. Arrived at the capital, all were newly clothed at the expense of the state. An entire district of the city was forcibly cleared of its inhabitants for the accommodation of the strangers. What the generosity of the Khalifa forgot or refused, the predatory habits of his clansmen procured, and they robbed, plundered, and swindled with all the arrogance and impunity of royal favourites. The populace of the city returned a bitter hatred for these injuries, and the Khalifa's object was attained. He had created a class in Omdurman who were indissolubly attached to him. Like him, they were detested by the local tribes. Like him, they were foreigners in the land. But, like him, they were fierce and brave and strong. His dangers, his enemies, his interests were their own. Their lives depended on their loyalty. Here was the motor muscle which animated the rest. The Taisha Baggara controlled the black Jihadiyya, once the irregular troops of the Egyptians, now become the regulars of the Khalifa. The black Jihadiyya overawed the Arab army in the capital. The army in the capital dominated the forces in the provinces. The forces in the provinces subdued the inhabitants. The centralization of power was assured by the concentration of military material. Cannon, rifles, stores of ammunition, all the necessities of war were accumulated in the arsenal. Only the armies on the frontiers, the Taisha tribe, and the Khalifa's personal bodyguard habitually carried firearms and cartridges. The enormous population of Omdurman was forced to be content with spears and swords. Rifles were issued to the Sudanese whenever safe and necessary, cartridges only when they were about to be used. Thus several millions of warlike and savage people, owning scarcely any law but that of might, and scattered about a vast roadless territory, were brought into the firm grip of a single man. The third principle of government which the Khalifa was compelled, or inclined, to adopt was to keep the relative power of the various tribes and classes conveniently proportioned. If an emir rose to great influence and wealth, he became a possible rival, and suffered forthwith death, imprisonment,